an army, train them to use weapons. To improve the housing, they were going to cut down the forest. They were going to hire laborers from the nearby villages to build them decent homes to live in. To alleviate the illness, they were going to dig sewage ditches. Co-op farms would be worked. The streets would be paved. The sick would be cared for. Schools would be built. Teachers would be trained. The children would be educated. The economy would slowly develop in a little village. It was a massive proposal. Involved a lot of sacrifice. Would involve a lot of labor. But the people agreed, it had to be done. And so they threw themselves into the task. Except for a few. Some were lazy. They didn't want to do all that. Others were too hopeless. Just too big of a thing to achieve. Some were too weak to do all of that. Others were too unwilling to make the effort. And as a result, these few were treated with contempt and ridiculed by the leaders and at times even punished. Well, work began in the village, continued over years, and slowly progress began to be made. People threw themselves into the effort, and eventually most of the villagers became obsessed with the work of saving the village. Now, while all this was going on over here in the little village, an event took place in a far-away castle of the king. An event that was unknown to the villagers over here, unknown to the elders, but an event that would have a far-reaching consequence on their project and have a far-reaching consequence on the lives of these people. And what happened over here, far away, was this. It was the birthday of the prince. And the prince's father, the king of the kingdom, offered this young man whatever he wanted as a gift. The kingdom is yours. What do you want? And the prince had heard about this rather industrious village far away from his governess who had come from there. And so being a rather generous young man by nature, he asked his father if he could adopt this village and share with them his own inheritance. Share with them what was his. Well, the king was a bit surprised at the request, but he agreed. And he decreed that it was to the village, way over here, to which, the village where so much effort had already been expended, that the prince's wealth would be given. And so the day arrived when the king's royal decree would be put into effect. But the prince wanted to announce it himself. He didn't want anybody to do it. He wanted to do it himself. He wanted to tell them what was going to happen. And so, disguised as a messenger, he entered the village on one of the days when it was filled with feverish activity. And at first he had trouble getting anyone's attention. But after handing over his credentials, that he was indeed on a royal mission, he revealed to them, for the first time, the secret decision that had been made by the king in the castle, far away. The prince announced to them that from that very moment, from that moment on, the decree was in effect, and that their life would be different. From now on, life was different. He said within a month, the royal treasurer would be in the town hall to hand out the first installment of money and free food and clothing. Sounds like a bailout. Don't get this way. And then shortly after that, the royal tutors would show up, the doctors and engineers would be sent. And no longer did they have to chop down the trees. No longer did they have to clear the forest. All the wood, all the stone they would need for their homes and walls would be given to them, including an army to protect them. And from that moment on, the village had no other meaning than the one which came from the decision made by the king over here. The story of someone else more powerful than they had intersected theirs. the story of what the king had done here had given new purpose, a new definition to the life of this village. But that wasn't the end of the story. To understand what happened next, you have to enter into the mind and the hearts of those who had expended all the effort for all of those years. The chopping, and the training, and the working, and the hauling, and the building. Suddenly, they were told that it was no longer necessary. How did they feel to see all of their labor now made useless by someone else's free gift? Until now, they were living their own story, determining their own future by their own actions. Their effort is what gave meaning to their life. What they did defined their life. And what happens now? A secret choice was made and was now revealed, and in one fell swoop, all of their activity and all of their labor for so many years was made unnecessary. They were no longer their own. They were now part of someone else's story. A new, I guess you use the word principle again, had been introduced into a new principle had been introduced into their story, which made their activity fundamentally useless. What they'd been working for and achieving with mediocre success was now given to them as a gift. And as a result, what happened was that in the time between the revelation of the secret and the arrival of the first installment, many villagers decided to reject the gift. They preferred to give their own meaning and their own purpose to their life, rather than receive the one that was being freely given. They didn't want to be dependent on someone else to determine these things for them. They wanted to define it themselves. And do you remember those who had refused to take part in the project when it was first proposed by the village elders? Those that were in prison for not working, those who were too lazy, those were hopeless. It turned out that it was they who were the first to respond with enthusiasm to this free gift. And from that moment on, their lives took on a newer meaning and a richer meaning from the new story that had intersected with theirs. And they willingly accepted and entered into it. And because they understood and because they appreciated just how blessed they had been, because they were open and willing to allow the king's graciousness to touch their lives, they were the ones who saw the full meaning of the gift, because they knew that they'd done nothing to deserve it. And because of that, they were the ones who lived happily ever after. Now, that's my story. And I'm going to stick to it. I said when I began that this was a story that Jesus told, even though he never told it that way. This was a story that encapsulated all that Jesus thought and all that Jesus taught. And so if you understand that story, you understand the gospel. You understand why the gospel is called good news. The story is central to the understanding of the Christian faith and the Catholic religion, because it says that we live under the shadow of a decision made by God apart from us. And you know who understood that best of all was St. Paul. This is Pope Benedict declared this to be the year of Paul, and I think it's fitting that I